Hello and welcome to the final episode of Season 1 of Book Folk. I'm your host, Christian Raffetto. Friends, today is a very special day. Today, I get to share my interview with Ned Bustard with you. Since the moment I saw Ned's lino-cut illustrations and interior design in Every Moment Holy, I have been captivated by his work. In addition to the Every Moment Holy series, Ned has illustrated and/or written over a dozen books for both adults and children. He's the creative director of Square Halo Books Publishing, he's the curator of the Square Halo Art Gallery, and he's a very sought-after lecturer on Christianity and the arts. Ever since I discovered that we shared some mutual friends, I have been looking for an excuse to meet Ned. When I reached out for an interview, he was kind enough to accept, and even to host me for an in-person conversation in his home. Ned lives in the city of Lancaster, a lively hub for art and culture growing right from the heart of Pennsylvania's agricultural community. His home, which he affectionately calls Book End, is modest, beautifully appointed, filled with good books, fine art, and warm hospitality. Ned is fascinating, unpretentious, and generous with his time and knowledge. I was so excited to chat with him. I'm so honored to have him on this podcast, and I can't wait for you to meet him. Ladies and gentlemen, Ned Bustard. So I'm here with Ned Bustard. Ned, thank you for the time together.
I appreciate the invite.
The first time, so I'd heard about you, Ned, from mutual friends and acquaintances, but I hadn't ever really seen your work until this very kind of strange, circuitous story. A friend of mine went to a trade show for books in the publishing industry, and actually Brad Herman, he was a guest on this podcast.
Okay.
He ran into, I guess, Rabbit Room had a display there, and they were giving out little sample, like promo copies of Every Moment Holy, just little paperback deals with excerpts and some of your illustrations. And I saw this illustration here, and it was set originally to...
Are you going to tell the people that are listening what we're looking at?
Yes, we are looking at Every Moment Holy, and I'll put a link in the show notes. On the very first volume on page 170, there's an illustration. Ned, you want to tell us a little bit about this picture?
Yeah, it's a lino-cut illustration inspired by a painting that Vincent van Gogh created. That was it's called At Eternity's Gates, and it's an old man with his head in his hands, bent over praying. Mm-hmm. And this goes with a liturgy for, I think it's praying when you feel the need to pray, or
sudden burden, I think.
Yeah.
Here it is. But I had, with the way it was laid out in this little sample, was a liturgy for one battling a destructive desire.
Oh,
and
okay. Yeah.
At my time in life, that was like me. And seeing this image, it was simultaneously like a picture of where I was in my heart and also where I needed to be more.
Right.
Like this posture before the Lord.
Absolutely.
And actually more than the prayer, this image like really spoke to me, and I was just captivated by it immediately. And I was like, who is the artist? Ned Bustard. I've heard of you, Ned.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the images you make and the way that you make them, printmaking, unbelievable medium, which I also had not really known much about.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So this was kind of my exposure to this, to a whole new world. So it's a pleasure to be with you.
That's fun. Most people's exposure to Every Moment Holy is through the coffee prayer.
Yep.
And that's where they encounter you first. I think from a book design standpoint, and this is a rabbit trail, but I think it's funny that this image is right opposite the page that starts prayer for those who are awkward in social gatherings. And people often think that this image is for that. I'm like, well, it works for that as well.
Right.
You know, I'm just in the corner with my head in my hands. I don't want to talk to anyone. So it's just funny.
Yeah, that's great. So first, what's the story of how you got into art?
Oh, I just grew up loving to doodle. My mom was an artist, and she encouraged that. They sent me to Christian school, and Christian schools don't usually have large art programs, so she would supplement that by sending me to afternoon workshops and such to help me grow in my art making And when you're a kid and you're doodling, you just can't stop. Sitting in church during sermons, there's a blank space on the bulletin. You're going to doodle, and or at least I did. And I just couldn't stop, and that has always been a passion. Also enjoyed comic books, and so it was always drawing my siblings and their friends as superheroes, and just having fun with all of that. So that was always something. And being at the Christian school, like I said, they didn't have a great art program, but it was small enough or large enough, I don't know, that I was the token artist. So when they needed posters, when they needed flyers, I was the guy who they would reach out and say, okay, Ned, just make a little poster kind of thing, something cute, something useful. So that was what I did. I was going to go to art school for college, didn't get in. Thought that was God telling me I shouldn't be an artist. So then I was going to take over the family business. Went to school for business, and I think it was like the first semester I finally figured out how much math they wanted me to take, and I was like, this is not God's will.
Math and artists don't usually go well together.
Nope. So I said, well, maybe I can do. I'd heard of what graphic design was. I knew of one person who was a graphic designer who loved Jesus enough then to become a pastor, because if you really love God, you're not going to be an artist, you're going to be a pastor. Right. At least that was the culture that I grew up in. And so I was like, well, I know that I could actually make a living doing graphic design, so that's what I pursued, and that's what I've been doing most of my adult life.
Okay, so can you talk about the difference between graphic design and, say, fine art? Is there a difference, and if so, what is it?
Well, I think of it all as craft, and certainly back in the Middle Ages, you wouldn't have had a big difference conceptually. The folks who were making books were artists. The folks who were making sculptures were artists. It was all craft, and that's what I think of that. I think that I'm not really interested in the contemporary, like I always say, artist is demigod, the Picasso, like, oh, he's just, divinely inspired and making this stuff that's just so esoteric. I think of my art as just a way to love my neighbor. I always say graphic design is loving your neighbor. You come to me with a need, and I beautify it and make it legible and, give it a good user experience. And I think that's love, and that's love as using my skills as a graphic designer, as an artist. I see them, for me, it's all the same, and maybe that's just because I'm not a really good artist. It's like, well, if I was really a fine artist, I would make distinctions, but I think it's all just outgrowth of my creativity. We're all made in the image of God, and this is my way of tapping into that.
So, but if you're trying to communicate something in a piece, that's different than if you're trying to communicate something about my business as your client.
It's all communication to me.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think it's that it's the communication that I'm interested in. It's we think about in John, it says the Word was made flesh to dwell among us, and I think of that as what we're doing. We're incarnating ideas, and because we want to be interacting, we want to communicate with each other.
That's really refreshing to hear, because I find myself sort of like laboring under this perceived difference I have between I'm a graphic designer. I don't see myself as an artist because it's sort of commercial work.
Right. Yeah. And people would say, "Oh, you're an artist." I'm like, "No, I'm a graphic designer." And nowadays, since I'm doing more illustration work, people say, "Oh, you're an artist." I'm like, "Well, I guess on good days I am." And really, it's just me being uncomfortable with not really the title artist, but our cultural idea of what an artist is.
Sure.
And it's like, well, I'm not the big white box artsy, let's have wine and cheese and talk about the splotch on the wall. You know, the stereotype of contemporary art. I'm not that.
You don't wear a turtleneck
and a beret.
Yeah.
I actually have a beret, but I try not to wear it much. So that I don't think of myself as an artist, but then I'm like, that really is what I am. I'm not a plumber. I'm not an electrician. I'm not a football player. I'm an artist.
Yeah.
And I should just get over my angst about that. But it's I'm of Irish descent, and they talk about if you're Irish, the idea of not thinking of yourself too highly. You know, Irish people like to take the piss out of each other, and so it's like, well, I don't want to put on airs. I don't want to have this grandiose, like, oh, I'm an artist kind of thing. So I tend to downplay it, but it's I don't know. It's probably arrogance in just an inversion of, inverted way of being very prideful by being super, super humble.
Right. Well, it's helpful for me. I appreciate
All right.
Can you talk about how you got into specifically printmaking? Because that's kind of an unusual medium. Like, lots of people are painters, lots of people draw. Yeah. Printmaking's pretty niche. Talk about that.
Well, Well, the way I got into printmaking is I took a class in college for printmaking and immediately forgot everything I learned. And then, but it was also like, well, we're going to show you all the different printmaking techniques. So you just dabbled through the whole thing. And then, as I said, I got into graphic design. And I was doing that for, 15, 20 years. And I would do illustration work with that. But it was all hand pen and ink kind of things. I loved medieval art. I loved the Book of Kells and Irish and Celtic art. That's very much of who I am in my heart. And a guy came to my church who had his MFA in printmaking. And I said, well, let's become friends. And we were talking, and we had a lot of artists at our church at the time. And I said, can you do a little workshop for us? Why don't you have us all come over and teach us printmaking? I was feeling the need. I wanted to make what I called real art. As graphic design, everything's copy paste, copy paste, copy paste. Save as, the idea of doing something that had no safety net to it, and that was tactile and historic. Like, all these things really appealed to me. So we had folks over. I think there were 6 or 8 of us. And I'm the only one who stuck around at the end. Everyone else was like, yeah, this is not really my bag. But my friend Matt Clark, he and I became great friends, and I'm his little Padawan, and he taught me printmaking. And it's fun because when I'll do workshops now, and people will say, oh, I've done this. And I'm like, yeah, 7th grade is when you do printmaking. It's one of those easy things that elementary art school teachers can have their kids do, and it's not too taxing. So I'm like, yes, that's you and me both. My art form is middle school level art, and I've come to embrace that.
Well, I mean, in the same way that drawing is accessible for any age.
Oh, kindergarten, right? Yeah. I should say that to other people. Oh yeah, drawing. Yeah, I did that in kindergarten.
That's right. Yeah, I used to finger paint all the time.
Yeah, that painting thing. Yeah, it's fun if you like that stuff. But yeah. I've moved on.
Who are some artists that have influenced you? You talked about medieval artists. Any?
Well, the Book of Kells. In college, I did a short-term missions trip over in Ireland and got to see the Book of Kells for the first time, and I think that pretty much. C.S. Lewis talks about his imagination being baptized by George MacDonald. I think my visual identity was formed at that point. Beyond that, at the same time, it's late 70s, early 80s, so there's Art Nouveau and there was kind of, if you think about just the look, new wave design. I was into all that music packaging. I was very interested in alternative music. Still am. So that was part of who I was. And then I grew up near Philly. So my wife and I were both huge fans of the Wyeths because we would go to the Brandywine River Museum. So I've got that kind of NCYS illustration kind of background. And then I love, as far as printmaking, within the last 10 years or so, I kind of discovered German Expressionists, and I love their approach to printmaking. And Eric Gill, who has his issues, but as far as being a printmaker, is just brilliant. So those are some of the artists I like. And then probably in the early 90s, I came across Edward Nippers. He's a painter down in the Washington area. Biblical narrative. He does like large 8 by 15 foot biblical narrative paintings, and he's a printmaker too. And so he has really influenced me a lot. He really is. I'm inspired by his work and his life and his faith, and he's just a fantastic artist. And I became a member early on in a group called Christians in the Visual Arts, which is no more, but met a lot of artists through that, and kind of grew to being influenced by them. And a lot of those folks I've brought into my art gallery, the Square Halo Gallery here in Lancaster.
Neat. So talking about Edward Nippers, I was listening to the Square Halo podcast interview with him that you
great.
It was phenomenal. And in that podcast, he says that art should be poetic or elusive.
Right. Because he would say that he's not an illustrator. And so he and I are different in that way. Like, he's like, I'm doing a poetic reinterpretation of this. And I'm like, I'm drawing a picture of what I just read. And when I think about my my illustration work, I am digging in deep, trying to grab everything I can out of the text to really represent the text well, because I'm a graphic designer, basically,
right.
and the text, the author, is my client.
Yeah.
In my way of thinking. Now, what's been refreshing and kind of expanding for me as far as my art making is through the process of doing the Every Moment Holy books. Doug McKelvey, the author, and I have become great friends, and he really has been interested in collaborating with me and really pushing me beyond, Ned, don't just illustrate this. That he sees my work and he says, there are things that you bring to the table that I want you to investigate and explore and expand and allow to blossom, that are beyond my text. He said, I don't want these illustrations to merely be illustrations. I want them to be poetic prayers on their own. And it took me a while to kind of appreciate that, or I guess give myself permission to go that way. But it was fun. I was doing a talk on Every Moment Holy at a college, and one person was saying that they had Every Moment Holy too and hadn't read any of the words, but were praying through the pictures. And I was like, wow. I mean, if you're Greek Orthodox, that makes complete sense, because
sure.
your icons are a window of heaven, and you're praying through that. But I never thought of my work that way, because I was thinking it was more as just kind of illuminating the words. And so it's been kind of exciting to say, oh, no, I can, that the images are as important. I don't know. Are they as important as the words in the book? Probably not. But that they are something that people are engaging with and finding encouragement and spiritual direction from, which is amazing, because it's so far beyond what I could have hoped.
Right. I mean, that was certainly my experience with this.
Yeah.
So, kind of pursuing that thread of alluding to or representing more than just what is on the text, rather than just illustrating the content. You're providing additional content. You use a lot of symbolism in your work.
Yeah.
So this is going to be kind of a whole line of thought on its own. Why is understanding? I've heard you talk in other interviews about having a vocabulary of art.
Right. Yeah.
So talk about what you mean by that, and then why is that important specifically for the Christian? And then I'll have some follow-up questions.
Right. I have a good friend who's an art historian. His name is James Romaine. He's done some books with Square Halo, and we are on a board together for art history board, and he's just brilliant. And we were talking once, and he was saying about folks who have a Dick and Jane level of visual literacy. And his thing was that we learn when we're reading, we learn bigger words and get more definitions, and we build out this vocabulary so that we can understand all these big ideas. You can't go from Dick and Jane to Moby Dick. You have to develop your vocabulary between those 2 points.
You can't go from See Dick Run to Call Me Ishmael.
It doesn't work. I mean, you can read them, but you can't understand them. And he said that a lot of times, and I think that it's easy to say in the church this happens, but I would say generally this happens. I think most people don't really develop that. We don't spend a lot of time studying art history. So there's people who they don't know the history of art. They don't know what things mean and what things have come to be associated with over the years. So that's something I think that needs to be a skill that needs to be developed. And like I've made like an art history program for homeschoolers and to do that kind of thing. I think it's important to do that because, well, for one thing, the Moby Dick is a great example. Like, we don't want to lose our ability to read Moby Dick, and we also don't want to lose our ability to understand and get the bigger ideas. In the same way, we don't want to do that with art. Like, you can imagine going into an art museum and having only seen, Bluey. I love Bluey. My girls and I, we watch Bluey. It's great. But if that's as far as you go visually, then when you stand in front of a painting from the Renaissance, you're going to be lost. There is no way.
You can't pull any meaning out of it.
No.
It's purely aesthetic.
If you can even get to that point. I think that you see that a lot of times when people come into my art gallery, if they're not familiar with contemporary art, they can't function. They're like, I can't see it, basically. And I think that that's important that we develop the visual literacy, as my buddy James says, so that we can enjoy what God has given us. There's so much richness to be enjoyed, but if you don't understand it, you don't understand. You have people who say, well, this is a great poet, but you have to understand French. And it's like, well, okay, I don't read French, so I can't enter into that. And I think it's the same way with art.
Madeleine L'Engle, in her book Walking on Water, talks about sort of losing our vocabulary. Mm-hmm. She uses the example of like the Book of Common Prayer. I don't remember the editions, but the original edition and the revised edition, how language was simplified, and how the new language it's dumbed down, it doesn't capture the imagination. And her point is that it kind of saps our ability to not just understand, but to think. Oh, yeah. Would you say that is true for kind of this conversation about art vocabulary as well?
Absolutely. And I think that that's the scary thing is that if you can imagine that, you can't understand Moby Dick anymore. So now you're trapped in the limits of your language. For me, I'm always, as my kids were growing up, I always was amazed by this idea of what can a toddler know if they don't have words for things? Certainly they understand some things. They're making connections. But if you don't have the words, you just there's no way for you to think big ideas. And you have to have that. And I think the same thing with imagery. I mean, growing up, we grew up and when I was a kid, we had Star Wars came out for the first time. All of a sudden, I can fly. It wasn't like we didn't have spaceships before, but now I'm like, oh wait, we have spaceships that really work. I can go. I mean, the spaceships. What was it like? It was the Martian from Bugs Bunny. So that was my limit. I'm like, I can't go there at all. Like Bugs Bunny plays it, that's fine. But then you see Luke going on this beat up old land speeder across this desert, and you're like, oh wait, no, this is a much bigger world, and there's much more opportunity for my imagination to run wild.
There's so many different directions we could go with this.
Star Wars, Star Trek, Doctor Who. Go back to metalingual.
So let's dial in on specifically symbolism. Symbolism and Christian symbolism. Use a lot of it in your art, and some of it's kind of obscure, like the dolphin.
Dolphin and the anchor, and
Talk to me about that.
Again, I was at a conference early on, and I was talking to someone who's I think was an art historian, and I wanted to talk about symbolism. I'm like, I'm really kind of interested in this because again, I grew up Reformed Episcopalian, so I had this liturgical background, but it's a very low church tradition. So I had the prayer book, but I didn't really have stained glass windows or all the symbolism. But then I discovered Celtic art, and I'm like, oh, there's a lot of stuff going on here. And then you do see things like, well, there's this lamb that carrying a flag. Well, that's Jesus, I guess, because it's got a halo. And so I started realizing there was more thing. And I went to a Catholic college my first year, so I'm in cathedrals and stuff for the first time. That because I'd grown up in basically kind of a non-denominational Baptist kind of world. And so now I'm getting to see there's more things there. And I remember this person said, yeah, you shouldn't do anything with Christian art symbolism because no one knows what it means, which is legitimate. I mean, you can say, well, Ned, you have this dolphin and an anchor. Nobody knows what that means. I'm like, yeah. And there is an aspect of I can't communicate to that. Yeah, I'm using a language that people don't understand. But I think that, for one thing, I come back to the same symbols over and over again. So if you look at enough of my work, you say, well, okay, the first time I saw the dolphin with the anchor, I just thought, this guy is a nautical buff, and that's fine. But it keeps coming up. So there must be something there. And so I'm hoping that it will encourage people to do some work, to look into things, to do some research. Talk about Edward Nippers again. I talked about symbolism with him, and he's like, yeah, well, I assume that if you come to my artwork, you have a working understanding of art history. And I'm like, well, that's a big assumption because a lot of people don't. But I was like, well, there's no reason not to have that bar set. Because again, it's at some point we can we could have it a whole evening where we're just going to talk Harry Potter, and everybody knows exactly what we're doing, and we have a great time. But then you realize at the end of the evening, we're done now. Like, we can't go beyond that because we've only used Harry Potter symbolism or stories. Like, that's our... Well, no, what if we have this larger history that we're drawing on? And I talked about Star Trek. I remember a Star Trek episode where Jean-Luc Picard is caught on this planet with this other guy and this alien. And the alien their race only speaks in metaphors from their famous mythologies. And then so Picard starts drawing on like Gilgamesh and things like that. And I realized, wow, we do have, there are things that we can be drawing on that allow us to communicate in different and better ways, I would say. That I can talk about wanting to study something, and I could say, I've got my pipe and my magnifying glass and my deerstalker hat. And I'm talking about Sherlock Holmes. And now I've just opened up all this stuff conceptually that we weren't talking about before. It's like, right. Well, I was just doing, instead of saying I did a little Google search. Well, no, now I'm Sherlock Holmes. And now there's all this other things.
Yeah, all the messages that come with Sherlock Holmes. You're investigating, you're not just like researching.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's these nuance and levels of meaning and understanding. And again, it's scope for the imagination. I can now think bigger. Instead of saying, I clicked on something and Google searched, I'm now thinking about Sherlock Holmes. And now I'm going and now it's bigger and richer. Mm. And so I'm hoping with symbolism that I use that people will at least say, okay, that's a poetic element. Like, he keeps using this dolphin and an anchor. There's got to be a reason for that. Like, it doesn't make sense. So I have to believe that there's a bigger conversation. And do I want to become part of that conversation? Well, I don't have to. I can just keep watching Bluey and be happy, or I can do some study. So I have one of my artist friends. I was working on the next volume of Every Moment Holy, and he said, well, don't put any more of those dolphins and anchors in there. You've got just too many. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'll try not to. And then, you start working on something. Well, I got to put a dolphin here.
It'd be perfect here.
It works. So, it's a nautical image. For the listeners, the dolphin and
Wait,
anchor.
don't tell him.
Oh, all right.
Go look it up.
No, that's right. You're right.
Be Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for saving me from...
Full disclosure, I had to look it up in this book I brought you that you already had.
Signs and Symbols of Christianity. Ferguson. Which, if anyone wants to know if there's a secret decoder ring for my work, 90% of it is that book, because that was where I got my education in Christian symbolism. And once I studied that book, I realized, oh, this is just art history. This is the history of the church. There's nothing really new here. Just my tradition was impoverished,
right?
Because it was a very, very second grade awakening. We're just going to have camp meeting revivals kind of background. And you don't need art for that. In fact, they probably discouraged it.
Right. So I'm put in mind of C.S. Lewis, and I just finished listening to the audiobook with my son of Paralandra.
Oh yeah.
And so he's pulling on a lot of classical literature. Now, I did not grow up with classical education, but my kids are being classically educated at home.
Fantastic.
And just from what I'm hearing about Greek myths and things like that, Lewis is pulling on all of that, not to draw any inappropriate connections, but basically saying the gospel is kind of like this. And when he does that, it really helps me to see the gospel in brand new ways, and especially if I've familiarized myself with the mythology that he's pulling on, he expands my understanding by this comparison. And I feel like that's kind of what you're doing with symbolism.
Yeah. I mean, you think about talk about holding a diamond up to the light. If you look at the diamond from one direction the whole time, you could say it's a triangle, and then you turn it and you're like, well, actually it's a circle. And it's only because you were able to turn it around. And I think that's what Lewis is helping us do. He's giving us these different perspectives.
So is there a connection between, this is going to be maybe kind of obscure, but...
I love it already.
Symbolism is drawing us back in time, right? Is there a difference between remembering and nostalgia? And where are the differences, and how does that connect with art, and specifically your use of symbols?
I'm going to derail us, because I would say I want to say before we go there, you said that it's taking us back in time. I would say it's not. That's just an aspect of it. That symbolism. You're a graphic designer. I'm a graphic designer. I make logos. Logos. That's symbolism.
Yeah.
I'm creating symbols. I love to say, if you see a red square with a yellow loopy M on it, you know what it is. I mean, it's bad hamburgers and pretty decent fries, maybe. I don't know. But it's McDonald's. Everyone knows what that is. That's symbolism. It's just symbolism that we know what it is. So it's our current symbolism. And in the Every Moment Holy illustrations, you'll see a lot of symbolism. And some of it is brand new symbolism that I've just made up for this application. So I'm either drawing from the prayer, or... a lot of times you'll see mermaids in my work.
Yeah.
Well, that's not a traditional symbol. I mean, you see it in art, but I use it very specifically, talking about C.S. Lewis. In Screwtape Letters, the demon says he doesn't like Christians or humans because we're this hybrid between spiritual and physical, and so it's just horrible. And I think, oh, that hybrid between these two worlds. That's what a mermaid is, or merman. It's a creature that understands air and water, rather than just, maybe he's got friends that are sharks, and it's like, well, water is all there is. And then, or birds, and air is all there is. Like, no, this is that creature. So I use mermaids as a symbol for Christians in that they are this hybrid. They understand both the physical world and the spiritual world. So it's an old image that I'm using in a new way to create new symbolism. As far as going, you were saying, what's the difference? Was nostalgia versus
memory or remembering?
Well, I think generally nostalgia ends up as kind of it's usually a sad thing, I think, versus memory. I think that like I have a Pinterest board on my phone that I call nostalgia, and it's basically just toys from the 70s. Okay. And I'm like, I remember playing with that Mego Spider-Man and that was fun, or I had that Hot Wheels set or that G.I. Joe, that's nostalgia. I'm looking back, I'm like, oh yeah, that was fun. It's not generative at all. Like it's a dead end, basically. Like I go back to, oh yeah, that Christmas that I got that pirate set, and it's fun to think about. I think memory is more generative. That memory is something that I remember something and then it leads to something else. Makoto Fujimura talks about in his book Culture Care. He talks about generative art, that and he and I and my wife, we were at the Philly Art Museum, and he was talking about the difference between Picasso and Cezanne. And he said Picasso takes an idea all the way to the end, and then you can't take it any farther than Picasso. He took it to its logical end and then stops and he doubles back and he goes and pursues something else. He said Cezanne gives you something, this visual thing, and it's halfway. Not that it's incomplete, but it's like there's actually more you can go. He's like, here, try this. I'm going to give you this arrangement of, I don't know, apples and oranges. But I'm going to do it in this way. And then you're going to investigate it and you're going to say, oh, I can then go on further and take that idea and continue. It's generative rather than like Picasso. It's like, well, I'm the best there is, and that I prove it by being the end of the road. So I think memory is the same way, that memory is generative. It allows us to move on and create new things because of what we remember. And I think the Eucharist, the Lord's Supper, is, we say, do this in remembrance of me. I'm remembering something through the Lord's Supper that I was not there for. So it's not even my memory. But it is, because corporately, I'm the body of Christ, part of the body of Christ. It is my memory, but it's a memory in the future. So I am remembering the wedding feast of the Lamb. So like, it hasn't happened yet, or it has. I mean, timey-wimey, like, I think new creation is actually existing now, and that we are going to be part of it, but it actually is happening now, because I think time is just crazy. But I think that I think it's a good example of this aspect of memory, that I can remember something, and I can actually remember something in the future. And I think that's what I'm talking about. So that's different than nostalgia. Nostalgia just looks back. Memory looks back and actually leads me forward. I did a talk for Kurt Thompson. He has a Center for Being Known. And I did a lecture back in October, and I talked about this, that there's aspects of, with Leslie having died, I forget her, and it makes me sad. So I do things to remember her, and like things like put pictures up around the house, or I take her perfume and I spray it in her study, so that when I walk in, I'm like, the smell reminds me, and it takes me back. And it's this liturgy that I do to remember, but the remembering, I can't go back, but it's taking me forward in this new, how I'm going to live in the future based on that memory. And that's where I tie it into the Eucharist, that it's this, when we're experiencing the Lord's Supper, it is something in the past, but it is looking for the future. And if it's true, this Christianity thing, then Leslie is alive now in the presence of Christ. And I am going to experience that with her. and people say, oh yeah, you'll get to be together again. I'm like, no, there's no marriage in heaven. She won't care. It'd be fine. We're going to have other things to talk about. But there is that, we're going to be part of this new thing. There is this new thing that I'm remembering in advance. It hasn't happened yet, but I'm going to be part of that.
It's almost like a prophetic act, right?
Yeah. And I think, that's interesting when you think about the things that we do. Even planting, a farmer planting, he's trusting something's going to happen. Now we have a history that if you put a seed in the ground, it's going to come up, but there's no guarantee of that. And I put many seeds in grounds that never sprouted. So it's like, but we do these things. We have these processes, and we teach our children catechism. Will it stick? I don't know. Will it grow? I hope so. Sometimes it does, but it's this act of remembering to go to the future.
Creating a community. You have a really robust community of all kinds of artists and all sorts of different mediums.
Yeah, God has been good.
Tell me, what's that like? And I guess
it's good.
How do you foster it, and how does it sharpen you? And how? Yeah.
Yeah, I think you look back at the history of art and you see these movements, and you're like, oh, how did that? How was there a Hudson River School of painting? How did the Impressionists happen? Well, these people got together, and iron sharpens iron, Proverbs says, and it's what they did. They sharpened each other, and we were made for community. We are people. We are the body of Christ. I was talking to my daughter once recently about one of her friends, and just had this kind of I say it's the Lone Ranger approach to Christianity. And you meet these people, they're like, it's just me and Jesus, and that's it all. And I'm like, well. Okay, that's not what the Bible says. The Bible says we're the body of Christ. So it needs to be more than you, because we need at least a hand and a foot, and you're just the thumb, I guess. I don't know. We need more than that. So I think it's very... but again, because we're Americans, it's one man, one vote. I can pull myself up on my bootstraps. So culturally, we're not encouraged to develop this kind of thing. Now, you're starting to see this more. I think almost in a twisted way, where young startup businesses, it's like, well, this is our family. It's like, no, it's not your family. This is your business.
Someone's going to get fired at some point. Don't fire people from your family.
Yeah, and none of us are going to have children. Hopefully, at least not on the clock. And so we see our culture starting to look for you see communists where, oh yeah, it's all community. But we actually are killing all of our people in order to generate that. I just watched a movie about Stalin. It was an older film that was a comedy. But you're like, yeah, he killed lots of people. And you can keep order. You can create community that way. Everything can work. We just have to kill half the people to do it.
Right.
And so I think as Christians, I think we have... the obligation to create community. That's what churches are. But even there, you see a lot of people, it's like, well, I found the church that I like, and when I don't like it, I leave it. And there's just not that long, I helped the church that I'm in get planted 25 years ago, and I'm still there. I was just talking to a guy yesterday. He's like, you were there for 25 years. Yeah, I've been there for 25 years. That's the only way it works. You have to be there for the long haul. And the same way with artist community. That's one of the things that's been really sweet about getting to know there's a whole bunch of artists in the Rabbit Room community. They were the ones who Rabbit Room published Every Moment Holy. And through them, I have met a lot of visual artists, musicians, writers, poets, and they're all coming together kind of based on a mutual love of certain books and love of storytelling and similar aesthetics. And we're in each other's lives now because we get together, once a year or whatever. And we also have telephones, and we also have internet. So we're creating community. I was just on the email to a friend in that community today who I needed feedback on one of my illustrations, and he gave me feedback, and it was very helpful because he's doing his book, and he's doing great there, and it's not Rabbit Room. Like I say, our community. It's not like it's not like a cult or I think it's very cultish, I guess. I don't know. It's not a cult. It's not. We aren't. I mean, you can be a member of Rabbit Room. I'm not a member, but there are these people that have come to associate themselves together around these ideas, and you start seeing good work coming from it. I have another friend I've made through that who's a printmaker, and he does all kinds of great books and book designs, and we're basically the same person, the same job, and just doing it in different spheres. And
is that Stephen Krotz?
Yeah.
I love his work too.
Yeah, he's great, and he we have a great time. And I say, tell me why this illustration I'm doing sucks, and he'll tell me, and he'll send me a cover design, and I'll say, yeah, that blue is the wrong color. You need to, whatever the case may be, and we have a great time, and I feel that collaboration allows at least me to make better art. I always am better if I have someone to push up against. And you talk about graphic design. I often say the worst thing you can say to me as a graphic designer is do whatever you want, because now I can't do anything. Like the best design work happens when you're pushing up against thing. I need at least a glass ceiling or a couple glass walls. If I'm going to set type, I need columns. I need to know what page size I'm doing. I can't just start designing a book if it's going to be a 5x7 or a 12x13. That really makes a difference, and it impacts my creativity.
Sure.
And I think that collaboration and community allow that chafing, that creative chafing to happen. And I think that that's important, because I think that left to ourselves, unless we're Picasso, our work is going to really become much more mediocre and uninspired.
You said in another interview I heard that art is not self-expression.
Yeah, that sounds like me.
It was great. It was a great quote.
Oh, good.
Can you talk about that more? Because I think it's related to what you're talking about here.
Well, I think that you can express yourself through art. Obviously, there are things that that come out. Our work is our work. Like I'm drawing from history and experiences and talents and tastes to create this work. So it is an expression of myself. But I think that that there's more. Again, that's kind of a small. I think of that as a small approach to art. That if it's just self-expression. I'm a very finite person. I can only give you so much, and then I run out of material. But I think that if I am looking at the created order and seeing what God has made, and filtering it through my hands and my eyes to create something new, I think now I have an endless supply of material, and it's about reflecting God's glory and repackaging and showing the amazing things God has made and helping you see. That was one of the things I love about my wife's poetry is she writes about very ordinary things, about trees and leaves and what have you. I mean, just kind of boring stuff. It's like, that's just a tree. It's just it's a flower. It was alive. We cut it. It's dead. And we're moving on. But she allowed, through her poetry, to have you stop and look and see things. And I think that that's what art does. It says, wait, stop. You need to look at this. You haven't really been looking. You thought you were looking at it. You said, yes, I know that's a tree. Yeah, but in your head, you've again got symbolism. Tree is a little round green thing with a little brown square off the bottom. Like that's a tree. It's a symbol. We've got it. No, this tree that you're looking at here is a completely different thing. For one thing, the bark is not brown, and it's not a straight rectangle with a round green ball on the top. Actually, the tree is orange, and the leaves are orange, and you can see the sky through it, and all of a sudden, it's nothing like what is in your head. It is its own entity, and I think that's what art does, is it allows you to finally see what you haven't been able to see before.
And so in that sense, you're not talking about yourself. You're talking about a truth beyond you, but here's how I see it. And you're telling somebody else.
Now it is. I am filtering it through my skills, whether they be good or bad. And that's where I want to get better and better, so that I can do a better job of representing what I see. And I'm not. I don't want people to think that I'm limiting this to photorealism or representation. Sure. Like, I don't think that that's necessary, because I think that there's lots of abstraction. Start looking at creation, and abstract is a big part of it. Like, doesn't have to be representational, but I'm filtering the goodness, truth, and beauty through my medium, in order for you to stop and appreciate the true goodness and beauty around you.
Yeah, and a lot of the interviews we've done on this show, that's like a recurring theme, that art is about seeing, first of all. If you're seeing, I guess maybe it's about observing. We'll talk about Sherlock Holmes again. Like, right. You see, but you don't observe. So it's about stopping and like noticing, interpreting, and then communicating. And to the extent that someone takes the time to do that and does it in their own unique way, you have all of these infinite ways or infinite pieces of communication that can be enjoyed by everybody, and then interpreted. Like, I'll get something out of the same piece of art that you're looking at that will be different than what you get out of it.
And the art made by 12 different people about the same object will show us different facets of that.
Yeah. So taking this a step further, how do you do that seeing and communicating? How do you personally do that with Jesus? How does your faith integrate with that act of seeing and communicating? And we've kind of talked around it this whole conversation, but if you could speak specifically to that.
Well, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is just jumping back to this idea of community, and that I'm able to see Jesus better in community, because I have my brothers and sisters telling me what they're seeing. And I think that we're all, it's a mystery. This faith that we hold to, and to have each of us be able to tell that story through that great story through their own little stories, allows me to see Jesus better, to be in community and meeting regularly with folks for coffee, or meeting Sunday morning and sharing together the songs and the Eucharist and the proclamation of the Word, allows the reality of Christ to be real to me. And so, again, that's why I'm just, any kind of a Lone Ranger approach to Christianity, I feel, is impoverished. So that is an aspect of it. As far as, I mean, a lot of my work is based on Scripture. I do a lot of, certainly the lino cuts and things, a lot of that, because Every Moment Holy is dealing with theological ideas, but then I've been getting commissions recently I have a new one that I'm going to be working on Psalm 23. So I've been doing a deep dive and really exploring the nuances of the original Hebrew, and how can I really capture this visually, this famous piece, in a way that is true to what is actually being said. So, my art, the seeing, is some of that. Is the opportunity to really dig deep and investigate. When I do, and when I'm illustrating the Bible, I'm going back to this idea for me of illustration is I want to illuminate and glorify the words that are there and really get to the meaning of what the author intended. And the author intends, in this case, is God. So I really want to think God's thoughts after him, as has been said in the past. And I think those are two different aspects of the Christian life that I guess would be illuminated by art making.
So when you're making art, is that, and I don't mean when you're studying a passage so that you can sit down and sketch and then ultimately do the line of cut, but when you're in the act of that, the actual making, is there a partnership between you and the Lord, or is it, because I've heard artists talk about that.
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
I sort of just, it's
Lord
very
gave
mystical.
this to me or something.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is that how it is for you, or is it different?
I think that there is an aspect of art making, and I think this is probably part of us being made in the image of God, and that we are creative people. Stephen Roach talks about that in our book, Naming the Animals, An Invitation to Creativity, that we're all made in the image of God. So we are going to reflect that. And I think that you can talk to enough artists that you realize there is something going on there that's beyond a cognitive or literal or a minimal kind of, there's something mysterious happens when you're making art of many kinds, that the muses come in and do stuff. And I think that I'm reluctant to say the Lord has given me a piece of art. People will say God gave me this song. I don't think so. I think I heard Steve Taylor say, well, God doesn't write very good music then. Like, why would he give that to you?
It was a terrible song.
Yeah. That was really cruel of him to give that to you. So, I don't say that any of my artwork was given to me by God, because I look at it and I can tell you all the things that are wrong with it. And I know that God is perfect, and what he does doesn't have these mistakes in them. It's definitely my work. But I think there is this idea of inspiration and that things do, I'll do my preliminary sketches for my lino cuts, and I'll know that something's going to happen between now and the end of the product, when I create this piece that is not there right now. And is my creativity, I'm just going to be clever later on, maybe, or maybe God's going to give me something. I do a lot of praying through my artwork. Usually, the desperate prayers of, when you're careening down a hill, you say, God, please let the brakes stop this car. A lot of times it's like, please, Lord, don't let this piece that I'm working on just completely fall apart and be garbage and I have to throw it out. Because I've done that. You get to the point you're like, all right, I'm just going to throw this away and start over.
Right.
I don't want to do that every time. So, there's a lot of those kinds of prayers. And just prayers for that it would be more than what I bring to the table. And I think that has happened. That you're like, the piece, after Van Gogh that I did that you resonated with. So there's something in there that's beyond me. The Spirit's using it in different ways in your life that is not my fault. I can't take credit for that. And then I think also just the process of art making is that with me, I'm doing repetitive carving of mind-numbing things. But what's nice, it's mind-numbing. So I'm able to be doing work, and because I'm just doing these repetitive motions and creating these patterns and shapes, I'm open up to prayer in different ways that I'm not normally. And I think that's only because normally I'm distracted and busy, and I haven't developed the internal skill sets to actually be good at praying. But I think that that when I'm making the art, it does open me up to prayer, and I find myself praying a lot in that, for people, for loved ones, for leadership of my church, and if people have good
normal
marriages.
Human things.
Yeah. But stuff I wouldn't be praying about normally.
Right.
Not because I'm against praying about them. It's just I'm not thinking about it.
Sure.
I don't have time. I don't care. It doesn't come to my mind. But now when I'm making this art, all of a sudden there's this space for prayer.
Yeah. Hello all, I wanted to invite you to join the Fellowship of Storytellers that we're building here at Humble Books. We're looking for other writers and artists who are committed to exploring truth and delighting in beauty. If that sounds like you, then come join us on Substack at Humble Books, where we connect to talk about our work, offer feedback, and bounce ideas off of one another. I also wanted to remind you to get your free copy of Thought and Style. It's that guided journal that's been structured around writing advice from C.S. Lewis. It's aimed at helping you to organize your thoughts, articulate them more clearly, and refine them so that they really sing from the page. Again, it's a free download. To get it, just click on the link in the show notes and download it from our website. And now, back to the show. You love books.
As everyone should. It makes me sad when people don't love books.
Talk to me about why, and that's maybe a silly question.
Yeah, no, well,
what is it about books that kind of is enchanting to you? Why do you think they're important? Why have you kind of, there's any number of things you could be doing with your skill set, but you do a lot of stuff with books.
Well, because I love the making of books is my favorite thing. Yeah, as a graphic designer, I love doing logos. That's great. Magazine design is fun. I love designing T-shirts and merch. That's a lot of things. Record designs, all great. But books are what I really love doing the most. One of the things for me about books, and this goes back to my childhood, is I have a strong memory of my dad and I watching a film together, and we would watch movies like we would watch James Bond, and he introduced me to British comedy, so I had developed a love of Fawlty Towers and John Cleese and all that at an early age. And then you meet people later on that don't get that kind of humor, and you're like, oh, okay, well, we can't be friends. But he and I were watching a movie, and it was Fahrenheit 451. And it's the sci-fi book by Ray Bradbury that I learned later that was a book. But in that book, it's a dystopian science fiction story where society's gotten to the point where they don't need firemen to stop fires. They've perfected building design so much that fires don't happen. So what the firemen do is they burn books, because we can't have books. We got to get rid of books. Books are bad for society. So firemen go around, and and turns out that book paper catches fire at Fahrenheit 451. So they're going around, they're destroying books, and I thought, oh, this is horrible, because my grandfather's bookcase was in our house. My dad loved books. He still loves reading books. He read Treasure Island to me as a child, and I had already gotten into Chronicles of Narnia, so I knew books were good. And here people are destroying books. I'm like, we got to save the books. And at the end, the characters are all who love books have destroyed the books because they're law-abiding citizens. But before they do, they memorize one book, and then they pass that on to their kids. So they teach that book to that child. And I was like, this is amazing. Oh, what would be the book that I would save? And I would think through. I think I ended up with Voyage of the Dawn Treader was the one I would save. And then I read the book later on, and it's actually more prophetic and amazing than the movie, as always is the case. But again, it's this idea of, well, we have to save the books. And so I think that is a big part of me and why I love books. It's this, that the books are good in and of themselves. And then, like I said, I was an avid reader as well as growing up, and would just sit in my treehouse and read book after book after book. Over the summer, we'd you'd do the book library book contests, and I was just voracious reader, and just found that books were where I found my escape and my joy. And then growing in the faith, you realize if I really want to grow, I'm going to read. I remember in college, first semester, I was in InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, and someone asked me to read the scripture for that week. And I said, when I think about wanting to know something, I read a book. And I said, when I wanted to learn how to French kiss, I read a book about what French kissing was. And then we read the Bible and we find out and then I really developed a love for theology. So then that got me into all these books. And so I just read. And then my wife, Leslie, she's the same way. It's, what can we read? And always looking for the next book to read. So we know the goodness of books. We homeschooled, and my wife would take our kids to the library every week and bring home books after book. And then I ended up starting a book publishing company. But I think that is more of a result of this love of books rather than I need to start a book publishing company. Because I was actually opposed to starting the company when we started it. But once we're in it, I'm like, yeah, we got to make books, and the more books. And I'm always surprised when people don't have books in their house, or they are not reading a book. And I'm like, I don't understand how you're getting through life that way. Because for me, books are identity forming, as well as, our household, it's an amusement. We all, I was amused this last Christmas. At one point I realized, everyone just is reading books. They got a new book for Christmas, and that's what everyone's doing. And they're going to stop and read books together. And I realize some families aren't that, they're going to stop and just, watch football together or something. But for us, the books are just a joy. For fun, the kids will say, let's go to the bookstore. Just so we walk around and look at books. Because I'm a book publisher, and we've been making books for the last 25 years. My middle daughter will say, we'll talk and say, isn't it great? New book smell, isn't that so good? And what about old book smell?
I prefer the old book smell.
And what about full color book smell versus just black and white books? And she said she was telling someone about that, and they were like, what? She said, oh yeah, they all have different smells. Because we would get books, buy the case, from the printer and open them up, and there's a certain smell there. And so it's a whole sensory experience, and certainly key to my identity and my family's in our family culture.
I mean, hearing you talk, I'm thinking about what we were talking about earlier with remembering.
Oh yeah,
like books are that you're remembering. It's connecting you to something that happened before, but it's giving you fuel for your own life.
Yeah. Because you're not limited to those pages.
Yeah. Also, talking about books and your kids and just hearing your kids nerd out about stuff. We were reading on the porch the other night, and we had awesome book, terrible edition, and I was complaining out loud to my children about the typeset. I was like, I turned to my wife like, this is going to be their memory. Looking back, like, Dad will always just bellyache about the typeset.
Oh, it's true. And actually, my middle daughter, she's the avid reader in our family. She says, I'm the reader girl. And she is. But she'll get to the point that she'll really love a book, but it doesn't have a good cover. Mm-hmm. So then she'll have to buy a different edition.
Yep.
And I'm like, I respect that. Yep. I do. I'm like, it's the whole experience. I did some book design, cover designs for a startup, and they said, well, just do the covers, and we'll just handle the inside. And eventually they came back to me because they were just doing, Times New Roman garbage or whatever it was. It was just, and you opened it up and you said, oh, this person just spit it out of their computer. Mm-hmm. And he basically ended up coming back to me and said, you need to do the whole thing. And I'm doing a book design right now for someone who's taken Spencer's Fairy Queen, and is redoing it as just written out as novel kind of. And so it's a beautiful project, and they came to me to design the inside. They're like, this is a beautiful story. It needs to be set in a beautiful way. It needs to have that that value placed on it, and that's what's been really nice about the Every Moment Holy is people responded as much to the pictures and the words as to the whole sensory experience of here's a book, it's hardback, it's gold edge, there's a ribbon, it's well designed, there's space for my thumbs, and people don't even know that that's a thing, but when you don't have it, you're like, there's something wrong with this book. You may not know what it is, you don't realize it's because you have to keep moving your thumbs to see the words, but the things like that are just very important if you care for books and if you want that experience.
Yeah. Sometimes I find myself wrestling with, am I putting too much emphasis on aesthetics, on packaging? Is it becoming kind of an end in and of itself? And then other times I realize, it's conferring value, and in the kingdom of God, if we believe in the content, then it should be packaged appropriately, where it elevates the content.
Well, again, I think you're loving your neighbor there. You're saying what you've made is of value for me to put this value into it.
And to value the end user.
Right. Yeah, because I love that person, and I want them to have a good experience with this. I don't want their life to be papyrus and Helvetica, because I love them.
Yeah.
And there are some people who don't love them, and that makes me sad. But, we're called to love our neighbors. And you're doing that by giving them that thing. I mean, you'd also have the parallel in how you make food. You can just put a box of generic macaroni and cheese out for people, or you can make them something really, really good.
While we're talking about books, what's a book?
Let's keep talking about books.
What's a book that's impacted you?
Well, Voyage of the Dawn Treader by C.S. Lewis. All the Narnia books have been a huge impact on me. I've read other Lewis stuff, and I love it. I mean, you mentioned Perelandria. That's the best of the series, I think. But I don't think I've moved beyond Narnia. Well, I mean, you mentioned Madeleine L'Engle's Walking on Water. And for me, that was a huge book. I read that at the same time as Francis Schaeffer's Art in the Bible. And basically, that gave me permission or theology or whatever I needed to actually be an artist. Because I knew I wanted to be an artist, but I also knew I needed to be a Christian. And I didn't see from my church background that you could do both. You had to either love Jesus or be an artist. You couldn't do both. Now, reading those two books gave me a third way. So those are huge books in my development. In sixth grade, I read The Hobbit. That was a huge book for me. I think Reason for God by Tim Keller is the new Mere Christianity. Like, I love Mere Christianity, but if you go down Tim Keller's list, like, I've had conversations with folks who don't follow Christ, and then all their questions are basically the chapter titles. And you're like, oh, he's answering all of the questions of our day. So I think that's an amazing book. I've got it. We can just look at my bookshelf. I've got a whole bunch of books. I mean, when I was young, I said, my dad read Treasure Island to me, and we were sailors. We had a sailboat, so like all that sort of thing. I loved King Arthur. That was why I did for Rabbit Room. I did The Lost Tales of Sir Galahad, and it's just a new book of all new Arthur kind of stories, because I love that. It's just great things to experience. The book, Kurt Thompson has some of his new books I've really enjoyed, particularly Soul of Desire is a book about the importance of beauty and in our rewiring our brains, so that's a recent book I like. I published it, but I think Malcolm Geit's book, Lifting the Veil, Imagination in the Kingdom of God, is a great book. I think it's the next part of the conversation, what it means to be an artist and a Christian. I mean, there's certainly classics. I mentioned Sherlock Holmes, and yeah. I don't know. There's too many. I've got boxes and boxes of books and books and books in my house, and it's those that they all take you someplace. And yeah, if you're a book person, I'm just preaching to the choir, and if you're not, I'm obviously not doing a good case, good justification for why people should read books or love books as a thing in and of themselves.
Yeah. Just as a quick aside, for me, I fell in love with books as just as the physical product before I fell in love with the content. Mm-hmm. So that can be a gateway too.
Yeah, well, I mean, and my wife and daughter, Carrie, have done this book, Wild Things and Castles in the Sky, a guide to choosing the best kids' books. And that's what it's all about, the aesthetic experience. This book is beautiful, and sharing that and bringing the reader into that experience. So yeah, for me, so much of books is the artifact. It's the thinginess of it.
Yeah.
And I think that helps us, certainly in a day and age where we're struggling with AI and this all disembodied kind of stuff that we're moving towards. To have just a book in your hand is a delight, and it's helping you get connected to creation, because it's a thing. It's a beautiful thing. Or it should be beautiful. Yeah. If the designers have done their job right.
Oh, man. 2 last questions for you. Where can people find you?
You can, worldsendimages.com is my graphic design company, so people can find me there. They also should look for me at squarehalobooks.com, because that's where all of my work as a creative director ends up. Certainly the Every Moment Holy, the Rabbit Room has a bunch of my work. I really often encourage people to just find me on Instagram, because that's where most of my activity is happening. Though of course I'm conflicted now because they're stealing ideas. And yeah, you have to actually go like through 3 or 4 levels to click a button to say that you won't allow the AI bots to take your ideas. Yeah, I haven't figured that out yet. So I actually have joined Kara is another platform I just joined. But yeah, Instagram is where I usually am spending too much time. And that's where you can see most of my work. Worlds and Images, I have a bunch of my art on a Facebook page for that, but you can also go to my website. But those are the primarily where you'll find me.
Okay.
I also have a gallery, Square Halo Gallery in Lancaster. Folks can visit me in the flesh on First Fridays. I'm there.
Awesome.
Showing other people's artwork, usually not mine.
Yeah, cool. And if you had some parting, you've given a lot of wisdom in this talk, but if you had some parting shots.
I say, whether it's wise, we'll decide later on.
Parting advice for any artists.
For artists, don't stop, keep making. And realize that if success is there's not a dollar value for success. And I have a video through Cursive Films called Making Good, where I talk all about this. And it's just that if you're an artist, make what you need to make and make it for your people. And your people are probably not that many people. It might just be your family, it might be just your friends, it might be your church community, and be thankful for that opportunity to make, and don't stop making, because we were made in the image of God to be makers, and that should be our consuming passion.
Awesome. Final question.
Uh-huh.
If you had to challenge someone to be on this podcast, to go through the gauntlet of being interviewed by me, who would you challenge?
I mentioned Stephen Krotz earlier. He's my friend who does book design, and I would challenge him, except I know some of the projects he's working on right now. He's pretty busy, so I probably wouldn't challenge him. I'd say go back and keep working, because you've got some deadlines.
I don't have time to be on this podcast.
Yeah, but he's a great guy and very thoughtful and loves the Lord and makes beautiful art. Same things can be said about my friend John Hendricks. I would highly recommend you trying to get him to talk to you, because he has made some fantastic books. He has a new book coming out called The Myth Makers, which I got to see while he was working on it, and told him, I don't like this page design. He goes, I don't like it either. It's just for position. I'm like, oh, okay, well, I'll let you go. But no, that book is going to be amazing. He also has a book called Faithful Spy, about how Dietrich Bonhoeffer tried to kill Hitler, and it's one of the best books out there. It's a hybrid graphic design, or a hybrid graphic novel and novel, and so yeah, if you could get, I challenge you to try to get a hold of John Hendricks, because he's one of the best illustrators I know, and just a wise, godly man who is making fantastic books.
Okay. John Hendricks, I want to play this for you. You've been challenged by Ned Bustard. And Stephen Kratz, you too. Ned, such a joy to talk with you.
Thank you
for
great.
taking the time. I really appreciate it.
This is a delight. Thank you for talking to me.
Art helps us to see truths that we haven't been able to see before. In fellowship, that looks like multiple artists working together to help their communities discover truth in new and deeper ways. Making is a sacred and beautiful act, and I'm grateful for Ned's reminder to behold with intentionality and communicate with love in the context of a community that sharpens us to do both in a way that is faithful to the Holy Spirit. And thank you, dear listener, for coming along on this first season journey of Book Folk. It has been such an honor to talk with all of our guests, and such a joy to have you with us. I hope it's been as delightful and enriching for you as it has been for me. And stay tuned, because even as you're listening to this, we are working on Season 2. We plan to be back in a short while with more conversations with bookish creatives. And while you're waiting for Season 2, the conversation is always happening over on Substack. Join us there to hang out with your fellow book folk. You can find us at Humble Books. And feel free to drop me a line directly at christian@humblebooksmedia.com. I'd love to be in touch with you. And so, dear listener, farewell. Keep creating, keep reading, keep seeing, keep loving. Until next time.